Hey, everybody. With us once again is Mark Collingsworth of Vere Global Financial Wealth Management to talk about the debt limit that's been exceeded today on Thursday and what happens from here. Will we default? Will we go down worldwide? Will it be an economic chaos globally, or is it just a lot of to do about nothing? Mark, what's going on? Just more political back and forth, or is this a serious problem? We've exceeded the debt limit. There's no authorization to lift it. The House, controlled by Republicans, is standing firm. The White House, on the other end, is standing firm that it won't be making any promises of reduced spending. So it's at a standoff. So what happens?
Well, it's several things, Larry. One, it's all about kicking the can further down the road because it's easy just to print more money or print more debt. So not a big issue. And a lot of people don't realize this. This since 1997, this is actually the 22nd time this has actually happened. And normally what happens, everybody digs in hard and says, hey, we're not going to raise the debt ceiling unless we start reducing debt, blah, 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 paying down our reducing our expenses. And it might get a little bit worse. I think the worst I've seen in my life is they shut down the national parks for like 2 weeks. So federal parks were shut down, all that kind of stuff. That might last out for another 2 weeks, but as always, people will start to fold and stuff because we've actually seen it where the government entity stopped getting paid for a week. Boy, talk about FBI agents and Department of Justice agents calling, and they cave when voters start calling the politicians and say, "Hey, I'm not getting a paycheck and I'm a government employee." They roll fast, so it's just a bunch of saber rattling.
Well, among the sabers being rattled is the prospect that Social Security payments would stop. Any chance of that happening?
Actually, there's a zero chance of that unless the government actually went into full blown default, which I don't see that happening. Is there's three mandatory payments the government has to pay before they can pay any other bills. That's Medicare, Social Security, and interest on our debt. They cannot make any other payments until those three things are satisfied.
Let's say there is a default. It'd be the first time ever in the history of the United States. The United States economy is considered the mainstream, the steadfast bulwark against to provide economic stability globally. Now, if we did default, would it be global economic chaos?
Mm, I don't think so at this point. A default, you can have what's called technical default, which basically you miss an interest payment. That's classified as a technical default. But the United States is in one of those rare situations that 100% of its debt is actually in US dollars. Unlike some place in Greece, where Greece might have its debts in British pounds, Japanese yen. Um, they can't print those, they can't print the currencies of a foreign country to pay off those debts. The United States, 100% of its debt is in US dollars. So theoretically, the United States could actually print $32 trillion tomorrow, and we'd actually be a debt free country.
Actually, we should point out that the debt limit that was exceeded today was 31.4 trillion, correct?
Yep.
Yeah. All right. There's other people saying, warning that even the prospect of a possible default is enough to weaken the economic image of the U.S. and cause some instability worldwide. Just the prospect that we could default. Do you buy that?
Not really. I mean, it might have maybe like a 1 day or two day jerk, but I think the longer term implications, if you defaulted, that would basically, at a minimum, would affect the credit quality rating of the United States. Would lose the AAA bond rating, and that would cause interest rates to go up. And interest rates going up, that would cause an additional slowdown in the housing market, consumer, and things like that. So indirectly, over several months, it would impact the consumer, but I don't think it would impact anything immediately.
Did it have any effect on the stock market today, or will it in the days ahead?
I don't know. Like I said, since 1997, we've had 22 occasions like this, and it doesn't impact it one bit. Today's sell-off in the stock market was more of a result of recession fears versus default fears.
How much of a sell-off was it today?
Let's see. The S&P 500 was down 30 points, and the Dow Jones lost 252 points.
So therefore, really no big deal.
No big deal. I mean, the stock market's more worried about a recession right now than a default.
All right, now, how do you think this is actually going to play out in the end? I mean, the White House is adamant that it's not going to negotiate at all in terms of reducing spending, and the House, now controlled by Republicans, is saying that they're not going to raise the debt ceiling until there are promises from the White House to reduce spending. So, how is this going to work out?
Well, as always, people like to dig in at the very beginning, but over the course of time, people are going to start to fold left and right because no politician wants to get blamed for default or even a loss in its credit rating.
Well, who's going to fold first, the White House or the House of Representatives?
Ooh, that's a tough one. It changes up. I'm probably going to say the first group that will fold will be the House of Representatives because under the Constitution, the House of Representatives, all bills, all spending bills have to originate from the House, meaning that the GOP, which controls the House, they are the sole people to actually make a recommendation on the money. So they'll have the fingers pointed at them first because the Senate can't do anything and the House of Representatives can't do anything because the Constitution doesn't even allow them to even come up with a number to say this is what we're going to raise the debt ceiling to.
Yeah, well, actually, that debt ceiling power in Congress, that was supposed to control spending since it was enacted quite a while ago. Has it ever worked that way to control spending? That they have
Yes.
the power not to raise a debt ceiling? Has it given them any leverage over the
It
years?
has given them none. It has given none whatsoever. It's actually worked out worse because when you give politicians an extra $1 trillion to spend, guess what? They spend $1.1 trillion dollars.
Yeah. Well, Mark, now overall, you say, eventually they're going to work this out. So working it out means that the House of Representatives, controlled by the GOP, they're going to fold first and allow more new spending by the Biden administration, correct? All right. So what does that do for the economy? I mean, we're already, overspending. We're already, the debt ceiling is being raised. So is this going to make any difference in the big picture in the long run over the next few years?
None whatsoever. None. As long as the government keeps spending, like right now, 25% of economic growth comes just from federal spending. So I don't see the government stopping because nobody wants a recession on their watch. So if you pull back spending it at this point, it has a major impact on the economy.
How does that work? You say economic growth depends on more federal spending.
So if GDP is growing at, let's say, at 4%, 1% of that GDP, so 3% is from the consumer, 1% is from the government's responsible for 25% of that GDP growth.
But how does that actually translate? More federal spending translates into more economic growth for the average person. How does
Well,
that?
because the government starts, let's say, give you an example. Let's say the government has an additional $1 trillion in its pocket. It might sit there and go, oh, hey, let's go out and let's give Boeing an extra $10 billion contract to build weapon systems. Well,
Yeah.
Boeing gets the $10 billion. Boeing says, hey, we've got to hire more people to fulfill this $10 billion contract. So they have to go out and hire more people, which stimulates the economy. If you're building the infrastructure bill, let's say that out of that $1 trillion, we're going to build a $6 billion dam someplace in the United States. Well, you now have to hire concrete companies, steel companies, engineers, and those companies now have to hire additional employees to come in and fulfill those contracts.
Okay, the other side of that argument is, however, that more government spending, although it creates more jobs, it also creates more inflation. So therefore, the average person is no better off despite the new government spending and despite all the new government contracts. What about that argument?
That is a good point also that the additional spending causes inflation. And I think that's one of the reasons why we've seen inflation go up recently is because of all the government spending. When we saw inflation over the last 30 years fall, something very interesting was happening at the same time you saw inflation. As you probably remember in the early 1980s, inflation was double digits and it has gradually fallen. The reason why it's fallen is because of a dramatic increase in productivity. I'll give you an example. 30 years ago, it may have taken one person, you hire one person, they may only be able to make two widgets, whatever widget is. Okay. Now, because of increases in productivity, technology, that same one person now can produce five widgets because he's more productive for whatever reason. Technology, computers, speed, iPhones, you name it. That productivity allowed you to hire that one person, but produce more than, but have a 100% increase in the product they were producing. That actually caused the inflation rate to fall. One of the problems we're running into now is uh, employees. We've kind of reached our productivity plateau. We're not becoming any more productive now. So it's now, instead of having that one employee make, two widgets, three widgets, four widgets, five widgets, we've kind of plateaued out at six widgets. We can't get one employee to produce six, seven, or eight widgets, if that kind of makes sense.
But how does the outsourcing to China factor into this? The productivity expansion is from China, not from domestic job creation, correct?
It's another good kind of example because in the United States, when you hire somebody, you have all these taxes that get taken out. You have Medicare, you have Social Security, state income taxes, capital gains if they invest stuff, just a plethora of expenses that go on to that employee. Those expenses are actually inflationary. Go to China, where you basically have slave labor. They don't have 401(k) plans. They don't have to pay state taxes. They don't have Medicare taxes, Social Security taxes. So they can produce goods over there at super, super low prices, even though they're not very good products. And because of that, those goods come to the United States much, much cheaper. Because when you buy a product here in the United States, essentially what you're paying for is you're paying for someone's 401(k) plan, you're paying for someone's health care benefits, you're paying for their salary, and you're paying for the corporate taxes are all rolled into the price of that product. In China, those expenses aren't included in those products because they don't exist.
Well, Mark, that's what I'm saying. The increase in productivity is largely China, not jobs for Americans.
That is correct. You're absolutely correct. China is actually winning the economic war against the United States.
Now, considering this hassle over the debt limit and all that, and what we've just been talking about, are we heading into a severe recession in the months or the year ahead?
I think we're going to slip into a mild recession, but my fears is we have got so much excess spending, so much excess debt. I think somewhere down the road over the next 6, 7, 8 years, I think we could have a really bad recession, and that one could really be detrimental long term to the United States.
And long term, China is the one that's dominating the world economically and also building up its military. I mean, is there any way to reverse the shift of power economically and even militarily to China?
I'm going to say no on that because, again, coming back to it, when you hire a U.S. worker, you're going to have Social Security taxes taken out of their paychecks. You're going to have Medicare. As long as we have all these additional expenses on top of us, we can't compete with a country that doesn't have those same expenses. They can cut their prices dirt cheap, and no one wants to stand up to China. One of the big, another big point affecting the U.S. is the Chinese can devalue their currency. So if one Chinese dollar equals $2, well, they say, well, hey, let's change the currency rate and make where it's three US dollars equal $1. So um, it makes the Chinese goods cheaper because China is a currency manipulator, and nobody wants to stand up to China and say, hey, you can't do that. That's not fair trade.
All right, so Mark, unless something changes long term, like 20, 30 years down the road, the United States is in decline and China is the world power.
Correct. And it happens to all your world superpowers. You know, 200 years ago, Great Britain was a superpower. 250 years ago, Spain was a superpower. Go back 2,000 years ago, Rome was a superpower. Now look at them. They're basically on the verge of all being third world countries. The United States, it's just a matter of time before we're in the same boat as Italy, Greece, and Spain.
So our grandkids would be living in what type of United States 30, 40 years from now?
Like one of the things I love to say, Larry, is the future is not what it's the your future is not what it used to be. Meaning that what we considered a great lifestyle for ourselves growing up, our grandchildren will not have that same lifestyle.
And nothing's going to reverse that.
Nothing's going to reverse that. We passed the point of no return years ago.
Well, that's a pretty bleak assessment of our future.
Well, like I always say, Larry, it's always the darkest before it gets really freaking bad. So we're kind of like, it's getting really dark right now.
Okay, I'm gonna go hide, build a fallout shelter, whatever. All right, Mark Collingsworth, Vere Global Financial Wealth Management. Thanks for that dire prediction of the years ahead. Thanks, Mark.
Anytime.